Okay, so I'm going to show you how to make some ground. First, you want to hit B on the keyboard, and this is going to give you the ability to add something. So right now I want to be in the right build mode. There's number 1 on the keyboard switches between these modes. And you can see that this is flashing because it's showing me when I can select the ground. So if I click this, I'm editing objects, which is not ground. If I'm editing floors, that's where I want to be for basically adding texture to my ground. So when you first start with a world, this is exactly what you're going to start with. The ground itself has no texture to begin with. Normally it actually starts the color green, so you should start with something that looks a little bit more like that. When you click it, you can add a texture. This is the modify panel over here, and as soon as you're in build mode, so if you start and you hit B, you're automatically going to open this panel. If you click this button, you're going to be able to edit the ground. You want to click it, and then you want to add your texture. So scroll down. When you click it, it will show you all of the different pieces that make up what this is. So you want to come straight down to the shape component and click upload. This is going to give you a place to put a picture on the ground. So in this case, I'm going to be using my own pictures that I've gone and looked for and found. And for me, I'm looking for maps of the ground because I want to be building on top of a map. Some people might not want to. You might want to have a tile for the inside of a building or something. I'm going to go with, let's say this one for now, or maybe this one. So this is something that I got from generating things with AI. I spent quite a bit of time doing that. And I'm just going to change the color to white here so that it doesn't show up, because you can see that it looks very green here, and that's because it's also green and has a texture. So if I make it white, it's going to show up a little bit more true to what I had there. And in general, I rotate the image itself by rotating the entire object. This transform box is really important because you're going to be able to change the position of this item, as well as the rotation, as well as the scale. This adjusts all 3 of those things. So when I do the rotation, I'm rotating it on the y-axis. If I rotate it any other way, it's going to tilt and it's going to go really squonky. So if I rotate it with that y variable, goes much better. So now I'm going to come back down to the shape component where I uploaded the texture, and now I'm going to change the texture scale. In this case, I want to actually make it grow bigger. You'd think that the number goes higher, but it's actually a smaller portion that it's showing on the object, and so this texture scale actually goes down. So I want to go 0.4, for example, hit enter, and now you can see that it's blown it up much bigger. I'm actually going to go maybe 0.5. I like that a little bit better. I'm actually maybe even going to go 0.6 and see what that does. But then I can see this seam here, and I don't really like that. So perhaps 0.55 or just 0.5. Okay, that's good enough. There's a little bit of a seam there, but I can deal with that. So the texture rotation also rotates the part of the texture that is seen here. In this case, I'm just going to stick with kind of the default, which should be 0. And there's also another toggle here if you want. This is complicated to explain, so I'm not going to get into it, but you can play around with it if you want. And in general, the roughness value I tend to set to 1, because when you rotate it, you don't want this usually to be glossy, but in some cases you do, and it is a bit glossy in general. When you do tile, for example, you might want it to be set to 0.25 like it is on default. Okay, so that gives you basically your very first ground texture, and you can play around with it. And you can do that with lots of different things. It doesn't have to just be ground. So if I click this button again, and B, by the way, switches between build mode and play mode. So this, if I go to edit objects only, add, let's say, show prefab, add a box, I can do the same thing with this. Come down to the shape component, go upload, hit browse, add something to it. Let's say I want to add this texture to it, and now this box is going to have this texture on it. You don't want to do this too much with very big files because eventually it begins to make the whole realm load very slowly, which is okay in some cases if you're not using very many of these textures. But in general, you want to do this only for the ground and maybe a few of the elements in the realm space. Otherwise, it's going to be too much. Actually, why did that one not load onto it? I think it's the wrong type of file. I think that type of file wasn't the right type. I've done that one before and it didn't work. Okay, so hit done. And now you'll see that this cube now has that texture on it, right? And so you can play around with things like that, and you can also change the shape of these objects and play around with them in rotation and things like that. So there you've got kind of a basic tutorial. And this one is not ground. If you wanted to select the ground again, you wouldn't be able to until you go into floors only mode. Just remember that. And yeah, that gets you started.